can we run our society in a self-regulating way? The idea is not new. There is the fable of bees, for example, and the idea that was basically proposed over there is, look at a beehive. It's so beautifully self-organized. Well, there is a queen of the beehive, but it's just laying eggs. It's not commanding what every single bee is doing. That's happening based on self-organization. And then they argued, okay, wouldn't it be nice our society worked in this way? Well, things are more difficult for our society because we are much more diverse. And diversity is actually important for innovation, for happiness, for resilience. So there are many advantages of diversity, and that's, I believe, the reason why humans are so diverse. And humans are kind of the king of species, and the superior species in the world, for three reasons: intelligence, social abilities, and finally, diversity. And we have to be aware of this. But diversity comes with a lot of problems. But let's dream a little bit about the self-organized world. So could it be possible? And in fact, Adam Smith came up with this notion of the invisible hand. And many economists actually believe that this would be the way to go. But unfortunately, it doesn't always work. There are systemic instabilities and problems that really bother us. And here are some examples. So, first start with an example where the invisible hand does work. Pedestrian flows under normal conditions. We see that we have these beautiful self-organized lanes. Different working directions are separated from each other. And that creates a very efficient flow. Unfortunately, it's not always that way. And when the densities get too high, things get out of control, and crowd disasters can happen. Here in Duisburg, 21 people died, more than 500 people were injured. Even though nobody had the intention to harm anyone. So how is it possible that people are killed if everyone has peaceful intentions? Apparently, loss of control because of systemic instability. And a good system to illustrate this is this circular traffic flow. You wouldn't think this is a difficult task. Everyone has a driver's license, everyone has a good car. But nevertheless, after some time, a small perturbation creates a phantom traffic jam. So traffic flow breaks down. Every single car is stopped, although nobody wants this to happen. Everyone is just trying hard to avoid this from happening. So why then does it happen? And we know basically that the reason for this is systemic instability. So when the density is above a certain threshold, the distance between cars are relatively small. There's always a little bit of variability of the speeds. It might be very small, but it's there. And then the next driver responds with some delay. There is reaction time, braking time, and so on. And in order to compensate for this, you have to brake a little bit harder. Next one even harder. And again, the next one has to brake more. So we have an amplification effect, we have a cascade effect, and in the end, things get out of control, and you have the traffic jam. This is, for me, kind of the prime example of systemic instability, a system where things get out of control sooner or later, even if you try hard to avoid it. Everyone is well educated, everyone has good tools, good information, and the very best intentions. So we just shouldn't operate systems in this parameter regime. As we've seen before, the outcomes can be much more terrible than a traffic jam. People might die. Or our environment might be destroyed. We call this tragedies of the commons. These are hundreds of years old problems. Nobody wants to destroy the environment, but it still happens. Of course, everyone wants to have a little bit more than others, and everyone wants to avoid making as much effort as the others, and that destabilizes the socially desirable state of cooperation. And it's like the free traffic flow, even though that cooperation would be good for everyone. It's unstable, it breaks down, you end up in tragedy of the commons, and a situation arises that is bad for everyone. This is like the traffic jam. Yeah, and cascade effects, I mentioned that already. A single perturbation locally can really mess up the entire world. If your network system is decided the wrong way, so while this is an experiment, actually, I hope that this wasn't. Because this is the bankruptcy of banks in the United States after Lehman Brothers, and you can see that over time, actually, hundreds of banks failed, and hundreds of billions of dollars were lost. The same kind of phenomenon, differences in detail. And of course, there are many other examples of this kind. So, how to manage these kind of systems and avoid global problems like global warming, global financial crisis, global epidemic spreading, and so on. And the classical way of thinking is, okay, we must get control of these systems, We need to have a strong state, basically, with all the powers to control the system. And does this work? That's an idea from 1600 something. Yeah? Does it work? Well, I do think that attempts to control complexity, to force a complex system to behave in a certain way, are often counterproductive. Not only because sometimes you get something completely different from what you want. It's a simple ecological system that the hunter tries to get to this point over here. Or these tipping point effects. There's also these kind of problems over here. So, for a long time, have people tried to improve airplane safety, flight safety, but it turned out very surprising that not technology was actually the best measure to improve safety, but the most effective measure was to establish a non-hierarchical structure, culture of collaboration in the cockpit, where co-pilots were encouraged to question the decisions and actions of the pilot. Another example from the official report of the Fukushima disaster, it comes to the conclusion that this was not a natural disaster, it was a man-made disaster, and responsible for the nuclear meltdown was our reflexive obedience, our reluctance to question authority. So I'm not making up these examples, so we have to think about it. And also, attempts to control complexity are often ineffective and expensive. So 100 years ago in Great Britain, there were 4 laws that were made per year. Now every few hours we have a new law. We have hundreds of thousands of regulations. And it requires institutions basically to enforce them. And they're expensive as well. And everyone is complaining about over-regulation and red tape. And that's the outcome. Most industrial countries have a debt level of at least 100% GDP, with the exception of Switzerland. And there is a reason Switzerland is managed bottom up. So maybe we have to think about the way we're doing control of complex systems, because can we further afford paying for it? That's the question. So let's think about this quote of Albert Einstein. He said, we cannot solve the problems with the same kind of thinking that created them. So what kind of thinking might solve it then? And the point is that information communication technologies allow us to create self-regulating systems. So basically, using sensor networks, the Internet of Things, will allow us to get real-time information that we can feed back to run complex systems in an adaptive way, in a self-regulating way. And I've shown you already this example, so I'll not go into detail again. But this demonstrates how powerful this self-regulation approach is. We can get rid of problems like traffic jams. Now the question is, can we find solutions for problems that are more complicated than traffic jams in production? In effect, there are a number of decentralized mechanisms to promote cooperation and social order and to overcome tragedies of the commons. So I'm not in favor of anarchy or anything. Yeah? It's really the question, what is a more effective, more efficient way of creating social and economic order? So let's look into this example of social dilemma situations that create the tragedies of the commons. Can we change the situation in a way that would allow us to overcome those tragedies of the commons? Well, in fact, we can transform social dilemmas into other kinds of settings by a number of mechanisms. Taxes is one way, but there are other mechanisms that are interesting, such as genetic favoritism, clan structures, and dynasties. We all know this. This was a kind of first way of creating social order and cooperation in the history of humankind. But many think that's kind of an outdated way, and we should have something which is based on your own effort. And in fact, meritocratic matching is a mechanism that is astonishing because it allows a situation to arise where everyone can be better off. Then direct reciprocity. So I help you, you help me, hopefully. This is another mechanism of friendship. Reputation systems, so-called indirect reciprocity, is another powerful mechanism, and it spreads like wildfire on the web because it's so good for our economy and society. It's good for customers, and it's also good for producers. Customers get a better service, producers can sell at a higher price. Then peer punishment, as it happens, for example, for the enforcement of social norms, is also another mechanism. So the question is, which mechanism is most effective and most efficient? And so we made an experiment where we compare, in this case, costly punishment with different kinds of signalizing mechanisms. And in this game, basically, there are two groups. They compete with each other. And the group that is more cooperative in itself has a higher chance of winning the competition. Now, that different strategies play against each other. So each group has a different social mechanism implemented, or no mechanism, no institution, as we say. So we let peer punishment compete with altruistic signaling, free signaling, costly signaling, no institutions. And we let every mechanism compete with every other mechanism. And we can see that two mechanisms stick out here. Peer punishment is pretty effective as compared to the others, and altruistic signaling as well. But it seems that altruistic signaling cannot compete with peer punishment. The signaling is not based on punishment, apparently, but it's based on people trying to tell the others, I'm going to invest, I will be cooperative. So it's a coordination mechanism. But to be believable in what you say, it's important that this message is costly. Yeah? And this is why basically costly signaling is superior to free signaling. And then there are two kinds of costly signaling. One, the altruistic signaling, is the situation where the cost that you pay is paid to your team members. So they get rich when you signal. So would people do it? Would people signal? Now the question is, okay, here we are just looking at the effectiveness. How often does a team win given the mechanism? But there is a cost. So who is more successful in terms of getting payoff? And then it turns out actually that costly punishment is very expensive. And that costly signaling, the altruistic social signaling, is actually superior to costly punishment. So punishment is not the best mechanism. Moreover, the evolution has made us other regarding, and that's a very surprising insight, and many economists for a long time haven't believed so, while sociologists, social psychologists had always said, okay, we're social beings. So what I've decided then is to do a computer simulation of the evolution of humans. A simple one, of course. And it turns out that economists were right almost all the time. Where all the red dots are, you get a homo economicus, a completely selfish individual as the outcome of evolution. But here is a small corner where surprisingly other regarding behavior, people with social preferences emerge. And interestingly, this happens when offspring are raised close to their parents. That means a situation that is actually the case. That means evolution hasn't made us selfish. Evolution has made us social and other regarding. And it turns out that through this other regarding preferences, people can overcome tragedies of the commons that the selfish individual, the homo economicus, cannot overcome. So in the end, after many generations, you have this outbreak of cooperation and other regardedness, but also cooperators have a higher payoff. So they're not stupid. It's not based on redistributing gains through a tax system or something. It's nothing to do with communism or something. It's a competitive mechanism where everyone wants to get the best outcome. But if everyone is friendly to everyone else, at least if you're friendly to friendly people, it will be good for you. And that's why social behavior is more successful than just blunt selfishness. What you get then in the course of this simulation, we start with completely selfish people, that there is a broad distribution of friendliness or other regardedness among the people, and that's actually pretty much consistent with what people find in the laboratory experiments. And even Adam Smith knew that. In his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he wrote, "However selfish man may be supposed, there are evidently some principles in his nature which interest him in the fortune of others, and render the happiness necessary to them, though he derives nothing from it." So, considering this, we need to have a new economic theory. An economic theory that's not based on the homo economicus, a selfish decision maker, but a theory that's based on social decision makers. And social networks, as I will argue, social media are reinforcing our social nature. So we're entering a situation where a new kind of economy is growing. And there are other studies that I'd like to mention. Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom has actually shown in empirical studies that self-governance works and is efficient, given suitable social mechanisms are put in place. So the self-regulation can work, and it's worth a Nobel Prize. Now, the question is, what will happen in the next decades? I do think that information communication systems will fundamentally transform science, society, economy, in all our current institutions. And that's related to a number of developments. So first of all, computational power is increasing rapidly. In about 10 or 15 years, some people expect that computers will reach the capacity of the human brain. So, what does it imply? Well, first of all, we know that computers have already beaten people in playing chess, also in playing sophisticated TV shows. And IBM's Watson computer is now being used for telephone hotlines. And they just decided to invest another $1 billion into this system for new business applications. So, it's pretty sure that machines like computers and robots will replace many jobs that people are doing today. Already 70% of all financial trades are done by computers. And then on the other hand, we are really entering this big data tsunami where within just 1 year we produce as much data as in 2,000 years of human history. So, how is this going to change our economy and our society? Well, we are entering basically a new industrial revolution. So let's look at the sectors of our society. It all started with agricultural society. So more or less most people worked in agriculture. And then eventually it dropped, the number of people working in this area dropped from almost 70% to less than 5% in many countries. However, there was an industrial revolution, right? And so new jobs were produced in industry. Unfortunately, they're already on the decline. And we'll probably lose another 50% of these jobs, so we'll have maybe something like 7.5% of jobs in industry. Then the service sector came up, and it basically replaced many of these jobs that were lost in other areas. But now we're in this digital revolution, and the question is, how will that change our society? So I try to subtract the percentage of people working in this fourth sector, the information and knowledge producing sector, from the green curve, and that's what you get then. So it basically shows you that you're in a saturation in the service sector while the digital sector is on the rise. The problem is just that when society transforms from agricultural to industrial society, from industrial society to the service society, from service society to digital society, it usually comes with hiccups, with problems, financial crisis, social unrest, and all these kind of things. So we need to prepare really well for what's going to come. We cannot just let it happen. Yeah? We don't want social unrest to happen. So we need to understand this future economy and society. So let's call it economy 4.0, the digital economy. And I think it will be one that's characterized by self-regulation. And it will be important to create options for people to do better things. Let's take the example of Zara. Zara has is a new fashion shop that is based on a different principle. It's not a boss or some managers on the top who decide what kind of fashion is going to be produced. But they give a lot of freedom to their designers to come up with ideas. And in this way they're much faster to pick up new trends and put it into new products. So when Madonna gave a concert, a few weeks later, they had basically produced fashion that was oriented at what she was wearing. And at her other concert in Spain, everyone was wearing that. So they were making a hell lot of money because they were so flexible. So the owner of Zara is one of the richest people on earth, because that's a superior principle. And some people could ask, okay, isn't it a utopian view of a self-regulating society? And I've thought about it, and as I was looking around, it turns out there are many examples of where it's already going on. We just haven't noticed it. We haven't paid attention to it, that there is a paradigm shift. So, Wikipedia is one of the prime examples after Linux, but Wikipedia is used by everyone. It's run by some tens or hundreds of thousands of people, but it's used by hundreds of millions. GitHub, social coding, OpenStreetMap. So we are seeing that we come up with social ways of producing and sharing. And you would think, okay, sharing is something that's not compatible with market thinking, but you can make profit with this. People come up with sharing platforms, and they make a lot of profit, actually. So this is interesting, and this is possible to create more sustainability at the same time. We're now entering a situation where people turn into prosumers, not just passive consumers, but they're making contributions to products. So we're becoming part of the production system. And some people say, okay, the 20th century was the century of the democratization of consumption. But the 21st century is the century of the democratization of production. Now you can buy a 3D printer and produce at home. From pizzas to teacups and all sorts of funny products. So you can come up with creative products and sell them all over the world. And you can organize yourself with friends, with colleagues, with knowledgeable people through social networks to realize the projects that you always were dreaming of, but you couldn't organize them before. So this is happening, and it has a tremendous economic value. So McKinsey has calculated that per year, open data can unlock a value of $3 to $5 trillion. That's a hell lot of money, and Europe should make sure it's getting a piece of the cake. So I'm summarizing. We are at the beginning of a new age, the digital age. And we're basically also on the way from a top-down control to a culture of empowerment. So we should go away from such a situation where you try to tell everyone what every single step in our life should be, towards a situation that empowers us to take good decisions, to do the right thing. We need to have the right information infrastructure, the right social mechanism to help us to self-organize and self-regulate. And then, it can work. This is a funny example where, astonishingly enough, there is no congestion. And there is a simple design principle behind this. Namely, you have a unidirectional flow over here, you have a unidirectional flow over there, and in between you have a buffer. So everyone can adjust the speed in a way to cross the traffic flow when there is a gap. So this is how I imagine our future society to work. And for this we need to, of course, find a way to make it compatible with our current system. So, of course, the society as we have it today will not just disappear. These institutions will be in the background. There will be an onion structure, basically, and a hierarchy of different institutions. But the question is, should the highest level in this hierarchy take all the decisions they can take, or should they take just the decisions that we can't take? And the message of my talk is basically, the second thing would be the right thing. Yeah, we should take as many decisions as possible, and the hierarchical levels on top of us should create these platforms that allow us to take good decisions and to help us self-organize ourselves. So we should have a minimally invasive approach, as it has been proposed actually for chaos control. So, you just need to step in very few moments to create order in this chaotic system, if you understand the system. So, and that is why Future ICT came up with these information platforms. The idea to create a planetary nervous system to have real-time information that's needed for the real-time feedback for the self-regulating systems. A living Earth simulator that would be able to identify the right kind of rules and mechanisms that allows these systems to self-regulate. Because at the moment, we're not very good at rule finding or rule making. So we need some help with this. And finally, we need to empower people through these information systems to take better decisions. And that's what the Global Participatory Platform is for. And I'm closing now with some ideas I've been working on. Namely, we could create social information technologies that would guide us in our decision making, but in a bottom-up way. So there are four possible scenarios basically when we interact with other people or with a company or with the environment. It could be a lose-lose situation. So it's bad for both sides. This is a situation to be avoided. It could be a bad win-lose situation. So it would be good for the other person, but bad for me. That creates incentive for the other person to exploit me, so I need protection from this exploitation. Then there could be a win-win situation. That's good. So we want to have a device that tells us, do it. You can benefit from that situation. And maybe we can come up with a fairer deal, so we also like to have technology that helps us to make it beneficial for both sides. And then there could be a good win-lose situation where it would not be in my interest, say, to do this interaction, but it would be in your interest. But if we interact, it creates so much benefit that you could pay me something to make it also beneficial for me. And so the question is, what kind of system do we need to create this value transfer to convince me that I should engage with you in this interaction? And so the technologies that I basically have invented have these names. So the social mirror would support situational and context awareness and would point you to a situation that would be favorable for you, or also would point you to avoid situations that were bad for you or for the environment. Then the social adapter would help us to engage into beneficial interactions. Social protector would warn us from lossful interactions and help us to avoid it. And finally, social money would be there for the value transfer to make sure that we're all benefiting from the interactions that we're engaging in. And that's it. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you very much, Dirk. Unfortunately, Dirk has to leave in the afternoon, but for lunch you will be here and also the break, so I encourage everybody to discuss with him. And we have now 20 minutes break.
Thank you. Fantastic.